controversy after Spain's 2-1 victory over Belgium. Did you happen to catch it?
No.
So here's the bit. As usual, they're getting a lot of post-game, post-match shots on the field, thrill of victory, agony of defeat, players coming together, shaking their hand, each other's hands, hugging, etc. And, of course, Spain's players, several of them exulting in moving on. Then there was an attempt by a camera person on the Fox crew, presumably, to get very close to an interesting scene in what looks sort of like a Belgium huddle.
Okay.
With the coach in the middle. And he is very demonstrative in whatever he is saying to his players. He suddenly sees the camera, offers up the look of love, man. If looks could kill, that would have killed the cameraman. Get the hell out of here. So camera guy gets brushed off and moved further back. But you know what? The Belgians didn't seem to realize there was a drone camera or at least one of those wire cameras above. So they basically said, oh, you think you're going to keep us out of your scrum? We've got it from above. And they didn't know. They're going to be bitter later when they find out that, in fact, this camera shot was even closer than the other camera shot. And I'm going to be very curious to hear what Belgium guy said. If it's the old, look, hell of a run. Remember this. Enjoy it. But we've got another step we need to take. Do the things you need to do to help us take that step. It was very, very demonstrative, and it went on for quite some time. I'm very curious to find out what that was about.
And Fox has a counter for everything, to use soccer parlance.
Yeah,
they have a counter. You think you're going to stop Fox?
No. Because again,
getting the shot they want?
You could see a couple of handlers with these dirty looks, too, like the coach, and they think, oh, we won. We got him further back. And oblivious, right above the head of the guy who was yelling to get out of there, there's the sky cam. Wow, it was very, very clever.
Alex Caruso did that in the finals. I don't know if you remember that. I think it was the finals.
Yes, that's true.
Where they're just trying to get the huddle shot, and he pushes it off. It's like, bleep off, man.
That's just...
Like, it's where you're getting your money.
Very
the TV
serious
money.
stuff.
Yeah.
There have been some efforts even going into this game to explain Spain's defensive brilliance, and a lot of it is they got possession of the puck almost the entire game. That helps, right? And so is this Wall Street Journal? No, this is The Athletic. A good piece on this subject. I don't have a byline on this thing. It never prints the bylines. Anyway, they quote a guy named Pablo Zabaleta, who apparently spent 9 years at Manchester City and is in awe of Spain's ability to ensure that their structure is solid even when they have the ball. So here's what he says, Zabaleta. He's praising one player, Rodri in particular. He can read the game really well. He always knows when to press. His positioning is always excellent to counter-press and win the ball back immediately. Here's the nut graph, as we like to say in the business, that we will connect to the United States of America. I've played in Spain, and I've lived in Spain. And in every region of the country, they do exactly the same thing. They all know that those 2 or 3 seconds after losing the ball are crucial, how they need to react, whether you come from the north of the country, the south, it doesn't matter. That is a huge advantage because when they meet for the national team, everyone has grown up with those principles. That's exactly what we were talking about the other day on this issue, that there is this ongoing discussion about, okay, what do we have to do better?
Right.
What has to change? And in the case of Jamie Watson, his pledge, or his, I guess you could say, command, once again, was, I want to see a unified approach philosophically and strategically. And you can argue that here that's maybe even more important, because the assumption is the best athletes in Spain are in soccer. Here you can't assume it all of the time, right? Because there's so many other sports that athletes might choose. So to that extent, you'd say, I'm not saying we don't have any athletes, but you say, well, that makes it even more important to adhere to certain principles to give yourselves the best chance if you stay disciplined to whatever your approach is. And I thought it was fascinating to hear that individual, Zabaleta, say, yeah, they have one approach. You either accept it or you don't participate.
Yeah.
I'm talking about at the highest levels. And there's still this sense that we, up till now, don't have that kind of unity. Now, maybe with Pochettino, if he stays in it, we're headed more in that direction. I don't know. But I thought that was very interesting, especially, as I said, in the wake of it's exactly what Jamie Watson was talking about when he joined us again the other day.
Yeah, I don't know the infrastructure well enough for USA Soccer. The problem with unifying, like they were talking about with the country.
Yes.
No matter where you are in the country, Spain's, I'm guessing, geographically a little smaller than the United States,
slightly,
right?
Yeah.
So that's where I just think about, I compare it to my sport, tennis, all the time, because that's what I know, that's what I understand. They've tried to do that type of unification as well, of getting all the good players into one area in different parts of the country, hearing the same message, all getting the same coaching, going through all these things. It's hard when you have such a huge, massive country. You almost have to have little centers all around that are USA Soccer centers. I don't know if they have that. And the kids that are in all the different parts of the country, because there's not like a central spot really for all of them to go all the time.
And it's harder. I'm sure it would be more challenging, but I don't think it's impossible when you're talking about players at these levels where you say this is in a sense in terms of this competition going to make it easier for us to take our best shot at this thing. If there's an understanding that there are certain principles guiding us, I think you have a little bit more chance. Regardless, it's obviously worked very well for Spain. They're not unbeatable. It's not like they win every World Cup, but it's one of the reasons they year in and basically decade after decade lately, they are certainly one of the dominant teams.
Tommy Nance trade's official, by the way.
We got him.
Just got the release. Just beeped. I wanted to get that in before we broke.
Yeah. Like I said, $800,000. Now, that's for the year, so obviously we're not having to pay that much.
Prorated.
And maybe it was one of those deals where they agreed to pay for like half of the remaining prorated part.
We're probably on the hook for less than
like $18. Yeah.
Who we sent out, the 21-year-old.
You might be right. That's our new relief pitcher, because we're starting to put the thing together and figure out we got to take advantage of this opportunity. We'll see how long this lasts.
In chess, you don't just move your queen right away.
You don't.
What do you have to do? Most people, I think, a lot of times they just you nudge. What do they call those things?
Use
the pawn.
You start with the pawn.
You nudge the pawn out.
That's true.
You get to go 2 spaces if you want. You don't have to, and see what happens after that.
Very good point. Let's come back and tackle an A-section story in which the origin is Minnesota, but it has now become a national story. It has become, like everything else, very much a Sharks versus Jets story. A lot to get to. We'll try to sort of lay that story out when we come back. Lavelle is scheduled to join. It's about 5:30 today. That'll be his 4th appearance on the Fan today. He was on the Power Trip twice. In Detroit Lakes. He drove up there. That's correct. Yep. And then he was in studio. He must have I hope he's not driving LaMelo Ball's wheels. He somehow got back in studio for the final hour of the Paul Allen Project, and I think he might have called into Common Show. I think he played Password today. I think he played Password. He's also, it's funny you mentioned Lavelle, he's at Target Field. Yes. Covering tonight's game. He seems confounded by some of the preparations. He's under apparently the mistaken impression that it's all about the baseball at Target Field as opposed to bells and whistles. What year does he think this is? The Twins are taking early batting practice while a wrestling ring is being assembled behind right field, and rally dancers are practicing on the dugout. What the bleep is going on around here? Yeah, I mean... And then he figured out... He did some reporting. Then he goes, figured out what everything was. Yeah, and now he's understanding it a little bit better. Oh, my God, I love Lavelle so much. This story first came to my attention via an op-ed piece. I'm going to read the headline on it. It was in the Star Tribune. Written by a guy named Montgomery Brea, B-R-E-A. It was one of those like guest contributions, kind of an op-ed guest column. He is identified as a data analyst who lives in St. Michael. The headline, I'm a Democrat. Minnesota's pardon of this child sex abuser was inexcusable. Subhead, having a family cannot excuse you from the consequences of raping a child. That's the first I had really paid much attention to this particular story, and now it's turned into a full-fledged nationwide, if not worldwide, controversy in the wake of today's developments. In fact, Marco Rubio, he's still Secretary of State, correct? He made the pronouncement that that the government was taking this problem away from anybody else trying to do anything to keep Tu Lu Vang in the country, that indeed he has been removed from the country as of today. Now, let me give you the back story. The backstory, again, relates to the op-ed column. The Minnesota Board of Pardons granted clemency to this individual, a Hmong man facing deportation to Laos for raping a 10-year-old girl more than 20 years ago. I'll give you, I don't want to get into all the quotes, but the background is Vang was 18 when he started assaulting his victim. This was in 2002. He received a removal order in 2006, the year of his conviction, but because Laos had no repatriation agreement with the United States, Vang, like many Southeast Asian refugees with deportation orders, remained in the country for nearly 2 decades, marrying and raising 6 children along the way. Let me scroll, get to a very specific spot here of some importance to, well, I'll find it. I think it's in another story. Let me give you a little more background before we get into opinion on this issue. The background on the story, as heinous as it is, in fact, yeah, here's what I'm looking for, but I'll save this for a minute, is that it ended up being all 3 members of the Board of Pardons in this case, and that includes the governor, I think the chief judge, and Keith Ellison, all agreed to give, in this case, to pardon this particular individual. Now, Vang is now 42. He addressed the board before the vote, said, "What I did was wrong. It was a serious crime. She was a child. I took something from her that she cannot get back. From my heart, I'm very sorry to the victim, sorry to other people who I hurt by these actions." And part of the reason given by, I believe, both Ellison and the governor for their decision here in granting the pardon was that the victim had, in effect, testified on behalf of the perpetrator of these crimes and basically said, long time ago, I think he's in a very different place, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been, since that initial announcement on the pardon being granted, a lot of reaction among Sharks and Jets, as one might expect. But the story with this announcement today, with the U.S. government getting involved, has taken another turn. And what I mentioned earlier is maybe it's impossible for any of us to rise above our biases about who we like politically and who we don't, right? I guess, as an example, if you despise this the presidential administration, the Trump administration, are you then obligated to criticize what the government, the federal government, as laid out by the Secretary of State, did today? Or are you, if you're being fair and honest, obligated to look at the facts of this case and perhaps attempt to evaluate the fairness of this particular decision? Can you possibly separate the two? On either side of it, really. Same with the governor. Is it possible that you may have great dislike and very little respect for this administration, the Walz administration, but that on the basis of what you've read on this case and what the merits of this case, that are you capable of coming to the conclusion that you believe that the verdict, so to speak, in this case is just, despite the fact that it's such a heinous series of crimes? I worry that for a lot of us, the answer is we can't rise above those Sharks versus Jets things, and I think that ends up complicating matters and makes it harder even to have any kind of conversation about this. Now, I've read, now there's also another op-ed, another column piece today attempting to defend the decision as painful as it appears and as deplorable as the acts themselves are, it has to do with, again, we have a system in which folks can be pardoned and that we occasionally believe in second chances. I didn't find it particularly persuasive to me, and I want to defer to some stuff out of the Ramsey County office because the stuff I read out of that office is what, for me, makes this as painful as it might be, because this individual has gone on to have his own family. He's married. I think he's got like 5 or 6 children.
6, yeah.
It's 6 children. As painful as all that is in terms of the separation, I'm left with a belief that the pardon board, or whatever it's called, the Board of Pardons, made a terrible rendering or a terrible decision, an ill-advised decision. And I'm further convinced of it on the basis of the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. As laid out in the Star Tribune piece, they prosecuted Vang and opposed the pardon. Tammy McConkey, director of the office's Victim, Witness, and Post-Conviction Justice Division, wrote that Vang received a lighter sentence of 30 years probation for the offense because the victim, quote, was experiencing pressure from her family to not cooperate. Now, that in itself, for me, calls into question potentially the sincerity of the statements she's making now. Can we trust those? I'm not here to pretend I could possibly understand what she withstood. I can't. But to me, that coming out of the Ramsey County office gives me great pause and great concern that the Board of Pardons did what they did on the front end of this. Beyond that, McConkey added that the abuse occurred over 2 years, from January 2002 through July 2004. Vang abused the girl in her own home and on one occasion drove her to his home and abused her there, McConkey said. While Mr. Vang expresses shame and regret about what his children experience when they learn of the offense, he does not share any thoughts or insight about what the victim must have gone through. That's pretty persuasive stuff for me, and I'd say pretty telling stuff for me. Now, again, before voting on the pardon, those who voted in favor of it, and again, it was unanimous, said the victim's statement here is very significant for me. We've seen some evidence here of rehabilitation. That, I think, was from the justice. And he declined to comment on this Thursday. This is a tragedy all the way around, obviously, for the family that is now separated. And I do believe that if you have a system that allows pardons, and you have something called the Board of Pardons that is supposed to take a look at these cases, we have this system in place. It is allowed to be used. It is part of our system, we've decided. But I also believe I can just look at the case and what I've read about the case, the merits of the situation, and I would say, based on what we know and what we've heard, he has to go. Again, you're separating a family. I don't know what's going to happen to the rest of the family. But, and let's also be clear about something. It's pretty obvious to me that the only reason that this case even got to the Board of Pardons is a hope that if the pardon was granted, as is stated in the Star Tribune, one of the Star Tribune stories, that would remove the underlying reason for Vang's current deportation proceedings to move forward. Now, I think there was an acknowledgement at the state level that the feds can still choose to not restore his green card, which is exactly what happened in this case. But to me, it's not a good enough reason to say, well, we got to do whatever we can to keep him in the country, maybe open the door to the possibility he stays in the country. That's not a good enough reason for me on the basis of what may well have been a light sentence that was dictated in no small measure by pressure that the family put on the victim. Sorry, I don't even think this, in that sense, is a close call. We can have nuanced discussions about close calls and how subjective this can be and whether we ever believe in giving a second chance, etc. If this is someone who technically is not supposed to be in the country, and let me give you a little more background on that. As I think we mentioned it. The assaults took place in 02 and 06, in 02. The removal order took place in 2006, the year of his conviction, but there was no repatriation agreement with the United States and Laos then. So he just remained in the country. We do now have those agreements. There is nothing that prevents the feds for doing what they've done. And I can excoriate and savage much of this administration's approach on this issue, and often have, as it pertains to what took place locally here. Not that in the operation not that long ago, correct? But I think at the same time, I can say, in this case, I think the feds are doing exactly what they need to do. Now, because we're in a sharks and jets world, here's the way it's going to be characterized. Republicans have jumped on this opportunity, and the Trump administration has too. They may be doing it for all the wrong reasons, but that's not going to get in the way of me agreeing with the decision. Sorry. I don't have the ability in this case, based on what I've written, or I should say what I've read about the case, and there's been a lot written to this point, to say, boy, this is a really, really, really close call. What did we say at the start of this whole process was, it's okay getting the quote-unquote bad guys out. Well, this bad guy, you can say, there's no sign that he has done any of this again. He's been in the country for a while. He now has a family. We can say all of that is true. But I'm still not comfortable with what the original sentence was, why it went the way it did, whether there were circumstances that made it lighter. And so I'm not sure there's accountability here. So if, on the basis of the fact that he was only allowed to stay in this country because we did not have the repatriation agreement, I'm not going to lose any sleep over the fact that he is removed from this country. And it may end up, one tragedy might end up bringing about another. I don't know what impact it's going to have on the family. But this level of crime, the length of time it went on, I'm not there. I don't know where you are. I don't know how closely you followed the case. If you want to add to anything,
not a ton.
That,
no, I think you're on the right track.
There are cases where I think reasonable people can disagree, and maybe we can reasonably disagree on this case too. But I fear that, again, for too many of us, the decision is going to be based on what we think of, as I said, the Walz administration in general, and what we think of the Trump administration in general, rather than the specifics of this case. I don't think there's any breathing room on this one. And I'm, again, not even convinced that the original punishment is commensurate with the level of terror that would be associated with this kind of systematic activity, criminal sexual activity over a period of years. As I said, this went on over a period of years. I don't care about age. I don't care about the backstory on the individual responsible for what he may have dealt with earlier in his life in the old country. None of that is going to matter. And it's always an interesting question about how much you factor in the victim statement, right?
Right. That's kind of what I've been thinking and wrestling with.
And I believe, like every other piece of evidence, it should be taken under consideration. But if what has been offered up in this particular piece, as I said, from the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, that, I have to say, calls into question a little bit how much weight I'm going to give the victim statement. And I'll ask you the same question I was asking. I was talking to somebody earlier about this off air. Is this case, there's only one reason this case comes in front of the board, right? And that is, we got an outside shot that the feds are going to let this go, but if we take away, if we pardon here, that takes out the underlying reason for his deportation proceedings. There's nothing to deport him on if he has been pardoned of his crimes. That's not a good enough reason to pardon. I sense it's more about that. I'll have to be convinced that this case would have come up as a pardoning opportunity regardless of his citizen status. I don't believe it. And I worry, frankly, that we know the level of bad blood that exists locally between Walz, Ellison, and the feds, right? Walz and Ellison despise the policy and the approach that the feds have taken, correct? And I agree with them on the way it was conducted via the Metro surge here. We've talked about that many, many, many times. But I'll say again, the idea that, all right, you want to take away potentially the opportunity for the feds to do what they're doing, even though you're acknowledging that you really can't take it away, but you want to open the door a little bit, it comes off to me as that's why you're granting this. And you go back to the crime itself, I'm sorry. There are some crimes that, to me, are at a level. And by the way, it's not like he's in prison at this point, correct? Right. He's not. Even that, I look at and I go, well, there's something that bothers me about this picture as well. But for me, all of these make me feel like this ends up becoming another political football in which both sides are sort of acting strategically on the basis of the bad blood they feel about the other side. Not necessarily about this case, the facts related to this case, and the statement that is being made. And in the end, I guess what I'm agreeing with is that Democrat who wrote the op-ed piece that we quoted earlier, who basically said, don't get near this. This is a bad move. And it can't be enough, again, because for some people it's going to be, well, you handed the Republicans another opportunity to say you're soft on crime. I don't care about any of those appearances. I would say if you're a Democrat, including this op-ed column writer, guess what? You can be a Democrat. You don't have to be a Republican to say, what are we doing here? We have examples that might fit. You're trying too hard in this one to make whatever point you're trying to make, and let's move on. It's a tragic story at every level. It may end up being tragic, involving, as I said, the perpetrator's family in this case. But I don't think that should have much impact. It wouldn't have much impact on me, I think, in that situation if I'm on that board. We do believe in second chances, even in cases, I guess you could say, this heinous, although there was an interesting quote from Amy Klobuchar saying that she had not studied the particulars of this case, but that in general as a prosecutor, she was against ever going down this particular road, just philosophically speaking. And I tend to agree. And you say, well, then what's the point of our system if you're not going to ever let anybody out? I don't need to let this individual out to necessarily find. It's possible I might find someone else that I would. But in this case, this was just all, I think, as I said, to potentially take. It's in the start of the Star Tribune story. The pardon removes the underlying reason for Vang's current deportation proceedings, according to Attorney General Keith Ellison's office. And they acknowledge the Trump administration can still choose not to restore his green card, but they wanted to open that door. They were too, in my opinion, eager to open that door. There's plenty of cases where I'd be with them about the way this government, the federal government, has handled these stories. They're ongoing. I got another one I'll save for maybe for later in the show or for tomorrow. But you gotta be selective. You got to be able to pick and choose on the basis of the facts. And the facts of this case, especially with the damaging stuff coming out of Ramsey County, sorry, it's over. We move on. And so I can, again, I think do two things at the same time. Be utterly critical of this administration, the federal administration, in general, in a lot of the decisions it has made and who they've pounced on and who they've gone after, and say that in this case, even if they're doing it for the wrong reasons, I agree with the decision. Move on. We're about 40 minutes. Well, I guess we went long. So what we'll do is we'll break here. I'll get to some texts. Bradshaw and Bryant, KFAN text line 64686. Don't forget, as I mentioned, Lavelle coming up at 5:30. We've got the top 5 at 5 yet to come as well. We do have an interesting nugget regarding the LeBron James story. I don't want to raise your hopes because I don't think it means suddenly I'm going back on what I said yesterday and the day before, which is it's over, Johnny.
Yeah.
He's not coming here.
Okay.
But it's an interesting way to look at the story, nevertheless, that I had not heard before. So I'll try to squeeze those things in as well.
You're listening to Barreiro on the Fan.
Text coming in. I'm going to try to run through some of those before the top 5 at 5 today. As I said, I got an interesting LeBron wrinkle, but I don't want to oversell it as me saying, what does this mean? But we'll nevertheless try to squeeze it in, and we'll also have Lavelle scheduled for 5:30 tonight. 763 guy writes, firmly believe that we shouldn't be sending people who committed crimes back to their own country where they won't face any justice for what they did here. They should do the time here and be sent away after their sentence if it's heinous enough. Well, he's on, as I understand it, he's out of prison now, correct? Unless I've misread the story.
That's how I read it.
I don't think he's in that position at all. So the case has been adjudicated to that extent. I think we're already in past tense in that regard. A strong lefty here, but it's a bad look. Opening the door to a lot of smack talk by the federal administration. I'll say again, 763 guy is not wrong, but I would add it shouldn't matter. I'm asking people to evaluate this on the merits. It's a bad look because it's a bad thing to do, as far as I'm concerned. Whatever the ramifications, I know we're in a political world, in a political realm. And strategically speaking, if you're a lefty, if you're a jet, you can say, well, we don't want to give red meat to the opposition, and that's what this is doing. So practically speaking, it matters. But what I'm saying is that shouldn't have to have, we should be able to talk about this occasionally on another level. This is bad, heinous, criminal stuff we're talking about. And that, to me, is what makes it a bad look. A pardon. And look, we know how many, we've talked about a lot of the pardons, federal pardons, that are indefensible on the part of the president, which is why this all becomes kind of performative for some people.
And that was Ellison's big response.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's playing the whataboutism game, I guess. And we're looking for some, what we try to talk, when people say whataboutism elsewhere, we say, well, no, we call it consistency. So we're looking for some consistency. If you're bothered by some of those looks, then if you open the door to doing what you did in this case, then you're running the risk of also being, I think, rightly in this case, very criticized. Get to a couple more via the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. Dan, this is where people with hierarchical mindset is dangerous. Not talking about you, mind you, but both parties have people that ignore their conscience and blindly follow their party or their hatred for someone. It's dangerous. This story is a prime example of that, ridiculous to the point where it's unimaginably insane. What strikes me about this story is we've got people turning themselves into pretzels, trying to somehow make this philosophical. And and that's in the effort of, I don't like it, but I don't want the other side to jump on it and take too much advantage of it. So I'm going to try to torture myself a little bit. But here's what we might be thinking. Here's the nuance of it. I just don't think the raping of a child, how many years ago? It doesn't matter to me how many years ago. If your situation is you should not be in this country, I don't think you should be in this country. I don't think you should be saved by a pardon board. And again, the pardon board didn't save him technically, but I don't care what anybody tells me. I took this result as that's the attempt. That was the attempt here. And that should have Zero to do with it. I don't believe this case is coming in front of that board otherwise. I don't. I really don't. Dan, I'm a huge lefty, but this should have nothing to do with politics. I think it's deplorable that the pardon board pardons someone who was convicted of raping a 10-year-old girl, no matter how long ago it was, and I'm not sad the perp is finally being deported, although I do feel bad for his wife and children. That's Chuck. Next to Hazelden, longtime listener. Well, maybe I won somebody over today. Dan, I suffer through your political rants every day.
Wow.
But today you've gained my respect. Correct, it's not the headlines. It all has to do with critical thinking. Thank you. One of the reasons I listen every day is your ability to not just support the DFL. It's interesting because yesterday we had the chief on, and the chief was laying out his belief that he's not a big Sheriff Fletcher guy, but he thought that Fletcher was getting too much flack for the live thing he did over the weekend that indicated it went into an exploration of the damage that Somali gangs are doing in parts of the community, right? And it's being, of course, viewed as you're stereotyping, although I thought Fletcher was, and his the investigators he had on with him were tried to be very careful in that regard and very specific, but also very honest about we can't ignore this issue. It's real. And basically, Blair Anderson, former St. Cloud police chief who joined us in studio yesterday, agreed with him, even though he's not a huge, in general, Fletcher supporter, right? And a texter texted in, the chief really shut Dan up. I bet you he wasn't quite expecting those answers. Well, actually, I kind of was, because we had talked about it earlier. We have the chief on, whatever his opinions are, because we respect him. And we think he has something interesting to say, and often very insightful to say. But the conclusion was almost like somehow that over a period of time, I've raised in his head the idea that I would be absolutely gobsmacked by the chief's viewpoint on these issues. So somebody else said, well, yeah, it is surprising that it didn't bother you. Maybe it didn't shut you up, but it is surprising because you rip Trump all the time. And this is what we get back to. The assumption is if you rip Trump, then you must go along party line on every single issue, national, federal, state, and local. And what we are submitting to you, we are proposing to you, is that this is a place where you can be liberated from that. And on one occasion or many occasions, you may be critical of Trump, but on some other issues, you could say, well, actually, I don't agree with the Democrats on this at all. I don't agree with their position might be. I don't agree with some of the blowback from the city council regarding you're smearing all Somalis by what Fletcher said. It's possible to do several things at once. Perpetrator is married to the victim's sister, if that makes a difference. It doesn't to me. It's been raised, but for me, it has absolutely no. I don't think it should have any impact, and I don't know there's any reason to believe it had any impact regarding the way the board ruled in this particular situation. Somebody else says it sounds tinny. We've had some microphone issues, I think. Again.
I've heard that, yeah. I've heard about it.
I don't know what to think about that.
I've heard about that, yeah.
I'd rather kick them out than pay for prison. Terrible decision, god-awful decision, only made worse by the environment that we are currently in. Could it be that they pardoned this individual to also protect the individual's family, ensure they have the support of a father, husband, source of income, etc., rather than stick it to the Trump administration? The pardon wouldn't be necessary if not for Trump. Hold on. That does not mean it was done because of Trump or that they would not have pardoned him had it been some other administration. Purposes of incarceration has to include rehabilitation. Correct. But you have the right, just as the board members, the members of this commission have the right to make distinctions and on the basis of the facts of a given case to say this is not an opportunity for us to be as interested in rehabilitation or, in this case, like I said, pardoning. I don't even like the term. But again, there's only one reason you're pardoning him in this case. And if that's what you have to do in a situation in which the crimes are this heinous, for me, that ends it. That doesn't mean I can't be humane. It doesn't mean I can't consider other situations. But this is a really, you could say, tricky confluence of events. And I would argue the confluence themselves make it, for me, fairly obvious what the proper course would be in this situation. Embarrassing for the left to even defend this guy. Let me try to get a couple more here if I can. My screen's freezing up. And then we'll prepare for will it be a controversial top 5 at 5 today or not so much?
There will be one controversy in the top 5 at 5.
I like that.
Late breaking, which is kind of fun.
It's very good. What was the last one? Strong lefty, bad look. Yeah, those are pretty much, so it's interesting. In this case, I mean, this is never a scientific cross-section. I think most people are in the same boat. But shouldn't the moral of the story be not every story, even journalistically, has to be Republicans pounce on this opening? What I'm proposing, again, is the possibility that there might be others who feel like this is pounce-worthy, if you want to use that term. Because if you reduce it immediately to that, you almost suggest there's no there. That unless you're a Republican, you can't possibly, or you're not likely to even question this decision. That's what I'm exhausted by. The so-and-so, the Sharks and the Jets pounce on the opening. Even though that is, of course, again, part of the political reality. But when we frame the stories, the news stories that way, to me, very subtly, we're almost making it sound like, well, it's a game. And if the game wasn't being played, there'd really be no reason to question this. There's every reason to question this. Top 5 at 5?
The Twins. Whoa. Chris Finch, his first comments on LaMelo Ball.
And LeBron?
Not LeBron.
Oh.
Well, he does have some comments about LeBron. I don't have that audio. I'm trying to find it.
Juicy.
But speaking of juicy, we'll give you some details on an altercation between two NBA players at Summer League in Las Vegas.
This is Bumper to Bumper with Dan Barreiro on the